The entire field of co-founder coaching is broken. There's no such thing. It's completely fragmented. There is no unified body upholding clear standards or research for what is most effective and the best practices for how to support co-founding teams. Hi, I'm Dr. Matthew Jones. I'm a licensed psychologist, and for the last 6 years, I've been working exclusively with startup founders and in particular, co-founding teams. Now, what I want to about today is this entire field of co-founder coaching because it is in its infancy. Just as decades and decades ago, there was individual psychotherapy, and then there was a movement of more and more practitioners who started working with couples in particular. That is the exact same inflection point we are at right now within the domain of executive coaching. Executive coaching is the broad umbrella term for individuals who work in any number of settings, including with startup CEOs, startup executives, all the way through more Fortune 500 and beyond type of executives. And it can also include, sub-definitions of working with managerial teams and others in organizations. Now, of that large umbrella term, there's several different subcategories that I was just kind of referencing. There's some coaches who specialize exclusively in working with startup founders. And that, most often you'll see CEO coaches, but there can also be other types of titles here as well. And these practitioners specialize in that particular journey, which, as you know, is quite different than that of the environment of a Fortune 500 executive. And so within this subdomain further of, more startup-oriented coaches and CEO coaches, there's another branch of individuals like myself who specialize in working with startup co-founding teams to improve how they communicate, how they make decisions, and are working to treat simultaneously the business and the relationship at its center. Part of what I've discovered over the last 6 years of doing this work is there's not many people doing this specialization, despite its overwhelming need, of which I can speak about momentarily. Whenever I first started 6 years ago, I scoured the internet. I looked online, I tried to find other practitioners doing this work, and I honestly couldn't find much, and not much had been written. So I thought to myself, wow, I must be the only one doing it. Turns out, obviously, that's complete BS. I was not the only one doing it. Many executive coaches who focused specifically in working with CEOs or leadership teams of startup companies were also working with co-founders. Not all of them wrote about it or talked about it, but behind closed doors, this was happening quite often because there was a high correlation between individual and internal challenges to grow and scale your company, as well as interpersonal dynamics. And so this shows up all the time. And, various team dysfunctions impact the individual, and individual challenges impact the team, of course. And so what I started doing was I started researching this relationship because two of my closest friends started a company together. And I watched them grow into a multi-million-dollar success externally, but internally, as you know, it was a very different story. They both struggled with burnout, imposter syndrome, various issues of this transition from IC to management to leader. And they also were, engaging a lot of triangulation with me. They would vocalize their frustration toward one another. And part of what clicked for me was, oh, this is a pursue and withdraw dynamic. One of them is more vocal in the criticism. The other one is shutting down and kind of avoiding some of these conversations, which is leading to decreased operational efficiency, which then justifies the person who's more vocally critical, who then feels the need to go even further and be more aggressive in this criticism. And whenever I saw that pursue withdraw dynamic from emotion-focused couples therapy and Sue Johnson's work, it made me realize, oh, at the root, this is an attachment-based relationship, meaning you cannot help but build a degree of closeness with your co-founder. A deep psychological part of your brain in the limbic system that's oriented towards safety and security wants this relationship to be reliable. You want them to be responsive. You want them to be attuned to your emotional needs. And all of these are basic fundamentals of our human wiring, right? This is the foundation of attachment theory. And if that's true, then every single tool, framework, and relational pattern that comes from clinical psychology, in particular the various schools of thought within couples therapy, apply to this relationship, which is the most important relationship in your company. So to come back to this idea of co-founder coaching, I didn't see many individuals who were doing this work. I started doing this research. I wrote a whole book on this called The Co-Founder Effect. Highly recommend picking it up if you're at all interested. And as I now zoom back into this topic, of the state of co-founder coaching more generally. What I see is now, fast forward, a few years, now there's many different practitioners who both engage in this type of work as they did prior. So executive coaches, CEO coaches, startup coaches, and there's so many people doing this informally. There's individuals who, are more on the advisory capacity, who find themselves intervening and trying to hear both sides and kind of create a conducive environment for the two co-founders to improve how they're communicating. There's also parentified personalities within organizations who are doing some of this work, unfortunately, because the co-founders can't get their shit together. And so, whether it's head of people or someone in HR or whatever the case may be, often coming in to mitigate and help manage the situation. There's also, investors who frequently find themselves in the thralls of a co-founder dispute. And in addition to those informal folks who are doing some light co-founder coaching type work, there's also a group of practitioners who are now starting to call this co-founder coaching, co-founder therapy, business relationship therapy, business partner therapy, business partner coaching, right? Like there's all these words because it's not yet defined for the work that they're doing. And so what many of these practitioners don't know is that they are, the language that I would recommend is in fact co-founder coaching, because we're not just therapeutically working on the interpersonal dynamics of a co-founding team, we're also working on the organizational level as well. And that's part of what is different about co-founder coaching relative to many other forms of coaching and therapy is we must have a bilingual stance, meaning we are both treating some of those internal and interpersonal dynamics, and we must resolve the business issues that are, at minimum, the symptom manifestation of those deeper issues. You following me? So therefore, part of what I want to bring up is, this field is not united. It's entirely fragmented. All these individuals are dispersed without a central vehicle of truth, without a central source of understanding what the golden standards are, what types of interventions are clinically shown to be helpful to working with co-founding teams. And because of that, it's a blessing and a curse. The blessing part is there's such diversity of how to engage in this work. I myself will give you an example. I typically approach, a couple sales conversations, individual or group, and eventually I have to meet with the group prior to agreeing to work with a client. And then I have them take my co-founder satisfaction index. It's a proprietary measure I developed based on marital satisfaction literature. And I adapted it for this particular circumstance so that I can see exactly the strengths and weaknesses of the team and know exactly then how to leverage the time in the most effective way possible when we're working together. And it's also an outcome measure. So I can track this data over time, and we want to see that number going up and to the right. After that, I might meet with each individual and get a little bit more context and history, especially if they're in a higher degree of conflict. And then my goal is to transition to group sessions, which becomes the primary vehicle, meaning we don't meet individually in isolation and then occasionally in group. It's the inverse. We meet often in group and then might infrequently switch to individual meetings because, in my belief, co-founder coaching, the relationship itself is the client. The system is what we're working to change. And so we're not here to take sides to be judge and jury, et cetera. That might be later on in a process of mediation or whatever the case may be. But in co-founder coaching, we're here to serve the relationship and help each person make micro adjustments in how they're relating to one another so that they can make more effective use of their time together, so that they can make better decisions, so that they can make faster decisions, so that they can build the type of culture they really want to live in and not just have some BS slogans on the wall. And so that's how I approach the work. I've also talked with coaches, in the UK, for example, where they kind of skip a lot of that and actually go straight to the main vehicle there is, these 3-hour deep dives. And they might do a couple of those and then kind of see what's unblocked and resume a lighter cadence thereafter. But they really do these immersive type experiences. And it's fantastic. And I've seen great outcomes with those coaches as well. And I know other coaches who, intervene, pre-conflict. So there's coaches intervene along this entire spectrum. On one end, you'd have absolutely preventative level coaching, which in this case might be a combination of educational materials, best practices, frameworks, et cetera. And some light conversations to create documentation of agreements, what I call in my book, like a co-founder partnership agreement. So, there's those types of materials where you kind of establish norms and are trying to be more conscious of these dynamics very early on, both business, operational, and personal. And then at the other end of the spectrum, there's going to be those mediation type experts. So, and this again can include attorneys, and often does, because it comes directly from that lineage. Or it can be various coaches, myself included, and others who have some degree of background and training in this, specifically for co-founders who are separating and wanting to do this in an effective, fair manner without creating an existential risk to the company. And so within this spectrum, there's multiple different points of intervention. I tend to intervene whenever there's active conflict. So yes, I can flex and be preventable. Yes, I can come in after they've agreed to split and they need support. But my primary expertise and focus is in the messy dynamics and complications of emotional debt that's already compounded, and we need to figure out a way to pay that down and get back on track so that we can scale with our company. And so, but my point is that each coach can specialize along that continuum. And it's a beautiful thing. And so I have talked with people who specialize in co-founder mediation. I work very closely with people who specialize in the very early stages of setting an effective foundation that will allow you to grow and ideally not even need a coach later. And so it's a beautiful field of incredible diverse thought, and therefore incredibly diverse degrees of intervention, right? We can all sort of specialize and create our own thing. And so I think that's very cool. The downside, however, is that there's no agreed upon standards for what makes an effective coach. And this stems from the fact that there's almost no research whatsoever on the co-founder relationship. So not even looking at what makes effective co-founder coaching, like that would be fantastic research as well. There's almost no damn relationship research whatsoever on this relationship. So, for example, one of the most often cited statistics in this field comes from Noam Wasserman's fantastic book, The Founder's Dilemmas. Part of what he mentions in there, and he has many other really interesting and juicy data points, such as teams who are founded by friends and family are more unstable than those founded by strangers. Why? Well, because as you know, those relationships can be messy. And so it feels like if you're going to give business level feedback to somebody that could be threatening, it feels scary because you might lose the personal, you might damage the personal relationship. So it's kind of a double bind. And any psychologist would, it's like, yeah, that's obvious, but no one studied it. So Wasserman talks about that, add some great quantitative literature to this topic. The other thing that he cites, though, and the statistic that is most commonly the result of this work and attributed to Noam, is that 65% of high potential startups fail due to co-founder conflict. Here's the issue. It's complete bullshit. If you actually read the book, it comes from a study from 1989, and it was a survey, not a real robust peer-reviewed psychological literature, that asked investors of failed IPO stage companies, why do they think the company failed? And so there's this checklist. One of the boxes that was checked, 2/3 of the time, was that there were issues within the executive team. So all that to say, every single co-founder coach who puts this on the website, myself included, is trying to justify and substantiate how important this work is to the field, is to startups, because we see it every day. Every single coach and every single founder I've talked to who has co-founders can recognize the importance of this relationship, especially after, a few years, because I think there is this early honeymoon period that early stage founders don't recognize. But yeah, seasoned entrepreneurs, people who have done this a few times, they'll ask them, right? This is one of the most important, if not the single most important relationship in your business. And so part of what is so fascinating to me is this entire field is built on this fundamental statistic that is invalid. It's a secondary source and it's misattributed. The actual data, if you read the 1989 study, is not significant and not directly related to co-founders. So that means that, Carta has done some excellent work and tracked that co-founder departure increases as the years in the venture also increases. So it seems to get harder, and some founders that I talk to think co-founders are less necessary as you grow a successful business. But it's fascinating to me because we talk about failure at a company level. There's so many different, surveys, and, it might say product market fit. A lack of product market fit is the primary reason for failure. Seems fair enough. But what that single checkbox also doesn't convey is, why didn't we achieve product market fit? Did we have different perceptions of the market? Did we have different perceptions of our ICP? Did we have different perceptions of the product, right? And were those strategic misalignments in the co-founding team responsible for the lack of product market fit? Often it is. And so that's the work that every single co-founder coach, every single investor or advisor who gives a shit about the founders and their mental health and their emotional well-being and their ability to execute sees every single day. So we know that this is an important relationship to intervene. We know that it disproportionately impacts venture and business level outcomes. And yet there's not a single peer-reviewed study in a psychological journal investigating this relationship with any kind of rigor whatsoever. That's mind-boggling. And so what I hope to do long-term is to help unite this field. This is my long-term plan, and my goal is to figure out a way to create best practices. It's going to be a two-pronged approach. I want to create those best practices and highlight all the different unique methods and unique times of intervention so that we can start to establish what this field of co-founder coaching is, what it looks like, who's doing it, what are general best practices, because we all see this from our own perspective, and yet there's high convergence with how we intervene and what we're working towards and what we see. And so how can we create a degree of standardization? How can we unite the field under this umbrella and name it something? How can we name it co-founder coaching so that it too can proliferate and have different subspecializations? That would be fascinating. Would love to work with all the coaches to help create that. Secondarily, and very much related, I want to bring more research and more attention to this primary relationship of startup co-founders, because my theory, and my book goes into far more detail on this if you're interested, is that the co-founder relationship is unquestionably the most important relationship in a startup company. There's no other person in this world who can understand you like your co-founder. And if it goes well, this relationship will buffer you from external stress. It will be a secure base for you to return to. You will feel a sense of relief of the stress inherent in the entrepreneurial journey when you're connected and have a good relationship with your co-founder. This also, by the way, is not just personal and psychological. This shows up in your ability to execute. It gives you far more shots on goal, far more flexibility and fluidity as you need to pivot, and helps you adapt to changing information, right? Like whenever you have that communication dialed in, you feel in complete lockstep with your co-founder, all of those business level decisions become easier. On the flip side, there's a synergistic effect in the opposite direction. Whenever it doesn't go well, it doesn't just stay locked into the professional domain. It impacts you personally. You take the stress home. You're up at night thinking about the argument with your co-founder you had earlier that day instead of thinking about your product, or instead of getting some rest. And so it starts to deteriorate your well-being. And if you have a partner too, you might be venting to them or venting to friends. And there's studies in marital therapy that show that when that's happening, it's actually increasing their cortisol levels. It actually has a physiological, measurable impact on those around you. Right. And we also know from the same bucket of literature in marital and family dynamics that problems in the home don't just stay isolated to the home. They show up in the workplace because you have decreased emotional capacity. You have less bandwidth, less empathy, less patience. Right. And so this is the insidious dynamic of a co-founder partnership whenever it goes wrong. And then not only that, but it's, again, not just isolated. I said it's not individual. It's also not just the co-founding team. Right? All of your employees start to notice this. It starts to create anxiety in the system. And then mom and dad are fighting, so I have to take sides and develop all these sub-coalitions and align with someone here. And so then the very individual who probably needs the feedback the most isn't getting it. So then they fail to scale. It increases the pressure and tension in the co-founding partnership. Other people observe this, and that's a negative way to create a culture. So then the entire culture starts to back channel and avoid difficult conversations. And then this accumulates in burnout and churn and employees leaving and not wanting to tolerate the founder dynamic, right? So, and all of that, by the way, doesn't just stay in the touchy-feely zone. That very much has a tangible impact on the business and your team's ability to stay focused and execute and have high velocity. So all these dynamics are interconnected. And my hope is actually to unite this field, because if what I said is true, if there's any grain of truth, then we have scratched the surface and not even really done any work whatsoever psychologically to understand this relationship or the people providing services. And I hope you'll stay with me on this journey as I start to create this field with you. And if this is at all interesting, whether you are a coach, an advisor, or a founder in this field who has experienced co-founder conflict and you know what it's like, I would love for you to reach out. I would love for you to start building this community with me so that we can unite all of these voices and all this attention to get more research and solidify this field together. Thank you.